Hi, Sean.
Hello guys, just testing my audio to make sure it's working.
Hello, everyone. This is Sophia.
Hi, Sean.
Hello guys, just testing my audio to make sure it's working.
Hello, everyone. This is Sophia.
Hi, Sean.
Hello.
Can you all hear me now? Perfect. All right. So we are going to get started here in just one moment. We have a lot of different folks on the call. You're going to hear from a lot of different folks, um, and we're going to get to the thing that you probably really want to hear about, which is the care elimination. Here in a little bit, I'm going to make co-hosts of the others that will be speaking here. That may take me a minute, and then we will go from there. We are not going to make this a free for all, so folks won't be able to just come off mute. I wish that I could make it a free for all, but I don't think we have that much time. We are going to get started here in just 1 minute. I think I have all my shit together now. There we go. All right. So, make co-host. We got Daniel as a co-host. We are going to make Meredith a co-host. One more. All right. So, folks, we're here today to talk about the latest and greatest information related to the ongoing relocation program within the State Department. Um, you may have heard today. Well, let's start first. We're going to talk about some welcome and some framing. We're going to talk about where we started and where we are now. We're going to talk about self departures, uh, care elimination, the TPS litigation. We're going to get an update from Meredith Owen at RC USA. Uh, we're going to hear an update on HR1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, and the impact that that has on our wartime allies. I'm going to share with you all the data, the numbers, the real info um, that we had as of the time that CARE stopped producing it, and then what still needs to happen, what you can do, so on and so forth. We're going to get started now. So first, I want to start us with a grounding in our mission, right? Our job at AfghanEvac across the relocation ecosystem is to protect, resettle, and honor our wartime allies. We do that through various mechanisms. AfghanEvac started as an organization, uh, stood up during the withdrawal, of U.S. and allied forces to unsilo information and assist with evacuations. We manage, as a program of the nonprofit, a coalition of 250 organizations. Still work 250 plus. We stopped counting, frankly. Still working the Afghan relocation and resettlement space alongside the U.S. government. And then there's a broader movement. There's people that aren't involved with us that are still involved in this, working really hard to make this happen. We focus on facilitating collaboration, improving information flows, expanding government relationships, sort of across three tenets: reducing uncertainty, maintaining urgency, and then faster and more, all undergirded by our national security. We work across government to ensure the voices of our allies are heard and the impact of our policies are understood. And sort of what we act as is connective tissue between the U.S. government, agencies, the nonprofits, volunteers, and Afghan families. I'm not going to read all of this to you. You can sort of see it. Back in August of 2021, you all recall that the U.S. and allied forces withdrew, leaving the embassy evacuated and vacant. There had been no consular presence or immigration processing in Afghanistan since then. We've had thousands of eligible allies left behind through the withdrawal. Groups like the Evacuate Our Allies Coalition and others were pressing the administration well before the withdrawal happened, warning that this would happen. And there was bipartisan support through both in government or bipartisan support for our following through on our evacuation, on our commitments to Afghan allies, both in government and within the general public. Enduring welcome was later established. AfghanEvac had a lot to do with that. The whole volunteer and advocate ecosystem had a lot to do with that. Civil society being at the table is why Enduring Welcome was established with the last administration, which represents the safest, most secure legal immigration pathway our country's ever seen. The coordinator for Afghan relocation efforts office was established. We worked with the State Department. They brought in a liaison from AfghanEvac to act as a liaison across the NGO community, helping bring the reality of information on the ground to the highest levels of government. That was working. The infrastructure was being expanded. Flights were increased. Services were added. Communications were improved. All because civil society had a seat at the table. It represents the first time that we had ever meaningfully kept our promises to our wartime allies. At its height, we had 28 flights a month leaving Kabul with 5,000 Afghans a month on those flights. Plus 5,000 Afghans arriving in the United States. There was an interim stop across 4 third country processing facilities: Qatar, Albania, Germany, the Philippines, Pakistan as a sort of hybrid. One of the established processing facilities, Qatar, served refugee and consular track cases. Pakistan had been, we'd gotten Pakistan to agree to allow us to process about 25,000 refugees there. And there was government communications were improving. It was working too slowly, but it was working. We were reunifying families. And then it all stopped. And we'll talk about why it all stopped. This is just a chart that shows you sort of like pre-January 20th, post-January 20th. And what happened on January 20th is that President Trump signed several executive orders, which resulted in an end to the flights, an end to reception and placement, an end to refugee processing, an end to and when I say reception and placement, I mean the welcome money that people would get when they got here, the help getting housing and help getting jobs and all of that. Since January 20th, there's been virtually no official communications from the U.S. government, and with Afghans or with civil society. It's been pretty bad. There are roughly 1,200 people stuck on the platform in Qatar. Those are all refugee cases, including 200 family of active duty U.S. military. TPS is being allowed to expire, so on and so forth. This is sort of what it looks like now. I'm not going to belabor a lot of this because I want to get to the care bit. This slide sort of breaks down under the executive branch the various executive orders. 14163, which shut down US RAP, which includes P1, P2, and DS 4317. 14169, which shuts down resettlement funding, flights, and welcome money. And 14161, which has not had an impact yet, but we expect it to, which is a visa ban. There was budget guidance that went from OMB to the State Department saying that they needed to use the remaining $600 million to shut down enduring welcome. Heretofore, measures had not been taken to do that. There's been no public statements from the president or the White House supporting Afghans. We're still awaiting clear guidance from the State Department. Care enduring welcome daily reports shut down on May 21st, and care has officially been eliminated, according to documents that were transmitted to Congress today. We'll get to that a little bit. I'm not going to cover all this executive branch or the legislative branch stuff. We can later on. We'll cover some important stuff. And then if you go to AfghanEvac.org/litigation, you can get a rundown of all of the cases that remain, but we're going to cover some of those in depth here shortly. So let's talk first a little bit about self-departures before we talk about care being eliminated. Now, all of that sounds really terrifying. There's almost no, there's no U.S. government help for Afghans, but the SIV program is still processing cases. Now, they're not getting any help to get out of Afghanistan, and they're not getting any help to get from a third country where they have to do their visa interview to get to the United States after they've done that visa interview and received their visa. But folks can still complete their interviews. So if you or somebody you know has a valid U.S. visa in your passport and you're trying to get to the United States, but you don't have the money, you need help, you can go to AfghanEvac.org/self-depart and you can get help with that. Now, it does, if you're a P1, P2, you can't travel if you're a refugee. If you're awaiting departure from Afghanistan to get to a third country to interview, there's no help for that. And then today, we've seen in the congressional notification, we saw that care has been eliminated. So what does that mean? What that means is that the U.S. government is officially ending the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts. That's the office created to coordinate relocation after the fall of Kabul. You can look at page 8 of the congressional notification to see what that looks like. And what's important is that this sort of runs in direct conflict with the CARE Authorization Act, which was passed in last year's National Defense Authorization Act, December of 2024. The Congress passed a law that said the State Department must appoint a coordinator for Afghan relocation efforts. Now, clearly, the intent was that Afghan relocation should continue. But obviously, that does not seem to be of interest to the administration. So the staff at CARE learned about this when we sent this out. They had not been told. The congressional notification misnames the successor office. What they actually mean is the Afghan desk, the Afghanistan desk. Seems like there's a lot of confusion and disorganization over there. If Congress doesn't act, if Congress doesn't take control, there's going to be no dedicated team within the State Department coordinating evacuations, working on family reunifications. There are something like 12,000 family reunification cases. That's babies who haven't seen their parents. One of our fellow advocates made an important point the other day that said if you arrived as a high school freshman in August of 2021, you would now be graduating high school in the time that it's taken to reunify you with your family. All functions that CARE was overseeing, including third country processing, flight coordination, family reunification, they're all paused and at risk of being fragmented or dropped entirely. And the big problem is that state won't tell us what they're going to do. They won't tell the world what they're going to do. Marco Rubio, at the congressional hearing the other day, Secretary Rubio said that they're going to comply with all statutory requirements. That was a big red flag for me. It seemed like he was saying they would appoint a coordinator, but I don't know that they're going to staff them up. They've been, in fact, cascading staff down at the CARE office. This reorganization is scheduled to be complete by July 1st. CARE staff was told that they'll learn their fate by July 1st. They don't have any clarity on roles or retention. There's no public explanation of what functions, if any, are going to continue. And if Congress doesn't allocate funding and additional visas, CARE's mission is going to end regardless of where the functions live on an org chart. We'll talk a little bit about the additional visas down the road. Let me see here. What it doesn't mean for CARE is it doesn't mean that the commitment to allies is over. But it does show that the infrastructure to carry it out is being dismantled, right? It doesn't automatically end all relocation or visa processing. Those efforts are going to lack a coordinating office, though. It does not stop Afghans with valid U.S. visas, like we talked about earlier, from getting to the U.S. Go to our website. It's on the screen now. And the Afghan Allies Safe Arrivals Coalition will help you get here. And it does not yet include a formal visa ban, but we do expect there to be one. We don't know when. We have no idea when. If it were me and I had a valid U.S. visa in my passport or a green card, I would try to get into the country as soon as possible. I'm going to turn this over to Daniel from Global Refuge for an update on TPS litigation. We're going to go here. Let me pop this up. Daniel, you ready for us? There we go. You should be able to unmute now.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. This is Daniel with Global Refuge. Did want to cover the TPS termination for Afghanistan that's received some notice in recent weeks. So officially around May 12th and 13th, we had notification from the Department of Homeland Security that it will be terminating TPS for Afghanistan effective July 14th. So there was an official DHS news release as well as a publication in the Federal Register with the protections of temporary protected status for Afghanistan ending on July 14th. So this is a designation that was created in 2022 and extended in 2023, running through May 20th of this year. TPS, for background, is a statutory version of blanket immigration relief that provides protection from removal and access to work authorization for foreign nationals of countries that are experiencing crises, whether it's conflict, environmental disasters, or other extraordinary conditions that prevent safe returns. DHS is tasked with reviewing country conditions, although it takes consultation from the Department of State and USCIS in determining what to do with an expiring TPS designation. By statute, DHS is supposed to make that review and make a determination at least 60 days before a designation ends. So with the designation ending on May 20th, we had expected somewhere around March 21st for some sort of decision about TPS for Afghanistan. That did not come at that time. There were news reports beginning April 11th, first with the New York Times, that the decision had been reached by Secretary Noem to terminate TPS for Afghanistan, as well as a different designation for Cameroon. That said, there were indications from DHS representatives in those publications and other publications that was the decision they had reached. However, it was still not formally promulgated in the Federal Register as it should have been. So we only got that official notice that TPS for Afghanistan was being terminated here about two and a half weeks ago. In the intervening time, there was a lawsuit filed by the group CASA about the reported terminations for TPS for Afghanistan and Cameroon. My understanding is that lawsuit is being amended to reflect the fact that we now have an official termination for Afghanistan. In the Federal Register notice, it makes reference to an improved security situation in Afghanistan. It has what we view as very cherry-picked numbers related to economic growth, to the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, as well as economic growth and references to tourism, bizarrely. It's also pretty bizarre about what was excluded. There's no reference to a pretty well-known pattern of reprisal, killings, torture, and other ill treatment of Afghan allies, those who are associated with the Afghan military or Afghan central government during the mission in Afghanistan. There's no reference to religious persecution of Hazara Muslims or Christians or other religious minorities, and no reference to the state of gender apartheid that's emerged over the last 3 years under the de facto authorities rule, both with the edicts and decrees on Afghan women and girls that were present in 2023, the last time this designation was up for review, but those that have expanded since then. So that's kind of the state of TPS for Afghanistan. It provides protection for about 12,000 individuals currently in the United States. We understand it's a mix of folks who came over in the evacuation. Some people have filed for asylum. Some people are waiting on a green card from a special immigrant visa. It's really kind of a hodgepodge of statuses of folks that have benefited from TPS over the last couple of years. That said, it's been a critical option for people, particularly with kind of a lack of clarity about the fate of parole, particularly in 2023. And moreover, it's also been critical to have a version of work authorization not tied to one's parole. So we are worried about the fact that people have work permits with a TPS validity date that ends on May 20th. So we are worried that the consequences are already happening, even though of people losing their jobs, even though the designation goes into effect or remains into effect until July 14th. So I'd welcome Meredith from RCUSA to cover anything I missed on TPS for Afghanistan.
All right, and we're going to go to Meredith next. Let me find her so I can unmute her.
I'm here.
Oh, good.
I'm
Excellent.
here. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Daniel. I don't have anything further to say on Afghan TPS related issues, but I am going to jump into some broader Afghan refugee and then broader priorities around the refugee population. So I'm going to start with appropriations with an emphasis on the fiscal 2026 process, and then talk a little bit about where we stand in terms of refugee resettlement processing more broadly and ongoing litigation. So as it relates to the FY26 funding process, we're paying attention to a few different things. So as Refugee Council USA, we're paying attention not only to Afghan refugees and FIVs, but also the broader scope of refugees, asylees, Afghan and Ukrainian humanitarian parolees, many populations in our scope. And a number of Refugee Council USA members operate disaster assistance programs overseas. So with that, we are paying attention to the rescission package that the administration plans to deliver to Congress at the beginning of next week when Congress is back from REFA. And we understand that it will attempt to codify or make permanent cuts to certain media outlets, as well as to foreign assistance and USAID programming. We're also paying attention to reorganization notification and accompanying plans. Sean already spoke to the concerns around what it would mean to dissolve CARE and reallocate certain functions to other components of the State Department. But we're also paying attention to the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, PRM, within the State Department. And although news reports leaked a earlier version of what the reorganization could look like, and PRM was still there, we saw just last week news reports showing that PRM would not only be administering refugee and displacement assistance overseas and operating the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, it would be assuming the functions of the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, which has been housed at USAID for humanitarian assistance overseas. And then I'd be remiss if we didn't mention the skinny budget that the president delivered to Congress earlier this spring, which, consistent with the reorganization plans, creates a new international humanitarian assistance account that would merge the Migration and Refugee Assistance account that funds PRM and the International Disaster Assistance account, which funds BHA. So they would be merged together and funded at about $2.5 billion. And the skinny budget included a big plus up for the Emergency Refugee and Migration Assistance account, or IRMA, which has the last couple of years been funded at about $100,000. Historically, it's funded at $50 million annually, and they're asking for $1.5 billion. However, that being said, the skinny budget proposes an overall cut to the MRA, IDA, and IRMA budgets put together. So it still represents a $3.21 billion cut compared to this fiscal year, FY25. I have to talk about the Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of Refugee Resettlement because ORR is in charge of providing refugees, SIVs, and other populations with cash assistance, medical assistance, refugee support services, and integration services. The FY26 skinny budget proposes a $1.97 billion cut to the Refugee and Entrant Assistance account that funds ORR and covers all of those integration services that I mentioned. We also understand that there are some confirmed reports around proposals to completely zero out the components of that budget that fund refugee cash and medical assistance, the self-sufficiency focused matching grant program that has 2-to-1 public to private ratio funding, and completely zeroing out refugee support services. That includes things like job training, English language classes, mental health care services, social enterprises. And then on top of reducing and zeroing out these parts of the budget, the administration is seeking to significantly reduce eligibility for cash and medical assistance upon arrival. Right now, it's at 12 months for refugees, SIVs, and others, and they're seeking to reduce it to 4 months. They cited funding constraints. However, this is that they do not have funding constraints, given we haven't had a huge volume of refugee arrivals this spring. And also, it is a situation of their own making if they're proposing to zero out these parts of the account. Our USA is requesting for FY26 to protect against funding cuts. We want to see an investment in robust restoration of refugee processing and admissions with safeguards to protect those use of funds in good faith. We want to invest in community-based programs that flow from the federal government directly to local communities, capacity to welcome and support those integration services so refugees have an ability to thrive. And we want to see Congress and community members lift up how important it is to continue to fund these accounts with appropriate statutory safeguards, as there are many refugees, SIVs, and others who are still in their eligibility period for integration services, some for up to 5 years after arrival. As it relates to the broader refugee resettlement context, with regard to ongoing litigation like Casito v. Trump, as of today, the indefinite refugee ban largely remains in place, apart from the resettlement of a small group of Afrikaners and plans to facilitate the resettlement of approximately 160 other refugees who are part of an injunction-protected cohort of refugees. In Casito v. Trump case, a third-party special neutral is expected to be appointed by the district court judge to review on a case-by-case basis which additional refugee claims qualify for injunction-protected status. And so it's important to note here that the standard that we're looking at is refugee cases where there's a strong reliance interest comparable to the individual plaintiff, Casito. So what does that mean? So we have plans for resettling 160 injunction-protected cohort, plus a case-by-case review for some additional refugees, unknown number. We have Afrikaner resettlement. 59 arrived earlier this month, with a planned group of approximately 100 in this first phase. And we have SIV self-travelers who may still be eligible for services if they arrived within the last 90 days. I would be remiss if I didn't say that there are so many refugees we have left behind in dangerous conditions. And ProPublica just released an investigation documenting the vacuum left behind by these dramatic cuts. I can put a link to share afterwards. And Refugee Council USA, represented by co-counsel, submitted an amicus brief on our behalf for us just 2 days ago, and I can put the press releases for that as well and share it with folks. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. All right. We are going to go next on to HR 1, the big, beautiful bill. Danilo.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Happy to jump in on this piece. This is Danilo with Church World Service. And Meredith covered a little bit of what Congress is up to, and so did Sean when it comes to the role that they can play, the role that they're currently playing when it comes to fiscal year 2026 appropriations. Those negotiations are ongoing. But what's really taking up a lot of oxygen on the Hill right now is this bill, HR 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, also known as the Reconciliation Bill. This is legislation that parties can pass if they hold a trifecta, the presidency and both chambers of Congress, because it allows them to avoid the Senate filibuster and pass provisions without needing bipartisan support. However, there's a lot of rules that follow along with this process, and we're kind of right in the midst of it. So it is Republicans' attempt to pass really sweeping changes to a whole host of issues. It does have to generally be budget related, and so we'll be talking mostly about sort of the budget pieces. But as passed by the House, because this bill did pass the House last week and is now sort of under consideration in the Senate, there are a number of provisions that would deal pretty devastating consequences for refugees, parolees, TPS holders, other immigrant populations. Thousands of Afghans here in the US would be impacted by these provisions. And I want to just talk a little bit about some of them because this is a huge bill. It moved pretty quickly through the House. I think there's been probably not enough said about some of these different pieces. So there's a section in this bill in the judiciary title that includes significant additional fees for applications that many Afghans are in the process of submitting or will have to submit. So that includes applications for asylum here in the US, applications for TPS, for parole or reparole, for work permits. There are significant additional fees included in this legislation, including a $1,000 fee for asylum applications and at least another $550 fee for work permits. These are fees that otherwise would not exist at all, and I think for good reason, given as many of us know who have worked with Afghans who came over here, it's not just thousands of dollars that people can just come up with to make a humanitarian application. And so that's deeply concerning for us. There are also provisions in this bill that would strip access to SNAP or food stamps, as they were previously known, Medicare from refugees, asylees, TPS holders, humanitarian parolees, others who are here, who have entered lawfully and would otherwise be eligible if not for these provisions. And also there's some pieces here that implement barriers to accessing Medicaid. There's broad impacts on Medicaid in this bill and ACA enrollment and student financial aid as well. So specifically, Section 10012 would strip thousands of Afghans from food stamps and SNAP. Section 112104 would strip thousands of Afghans from Medicare. These are provisions that would really deal an immediate impact on many of the folks who are already here. And again, I mean, part of the dynamic here is that a lot of these provisions were kind of thrown in at the 11th hour. There were some late comments from both Republicans and Democrats in the House raising concerns about these provisions. Representative Don Bacon, a Republican in Nebraska, Representative Blake Moore, Republican in Utah, both made public comments raising some concerns around these provisions that would strip Afghans and other humanitarian arrivals from food stamps and from Medicare who would otherwise be eligible for them. And yet those provisions remained, again, as did many controversial provisions in this bill. So what happens next? the Senate is kind of working on their own iteration of the bill, and we do expect the Senate to make some pretty considerable changes. But I think it's really important for us to be highlighting all of these provisions because there is so much in this bill as the Senate is working through trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. I think it's critical for members of Congress to realize these are pieces that really need to be cut out of any final legislation, given the serious impact on the populations that we're hopeful can continue to make a new life here. And this is going to make it very, very challenging, especially as it's cutting off access to critical support. So again, the Senate is working on it. Both chambers are in recess this week, but already members of the Senate are thinking about this bill. They'll be working on it in earnest over the next several weeks. The stated plan is to get this thing through the Senate and then back through the House by the July 4th holiday. That's another expedited timeline, especially given how freaking big this bill is. And so really important for us to be raising up these specific provisions and making sure that they're addressed and not included in any final passage. And I should also mention this bill includes some really significant increases in funding for ICE enforcement activities, dramatically expanding detention and family detention, restricting protections for unaccompanied minors. So a number of concerning provisions here that want to make sure people are aware of as we think about this bill. And again, you can kind of think of it as this just went through the House, was a bit of a whirlwind. Now it's in the Senate. The Senate's focused on this bill. The House is focused now on fiscal year 2026 appropriations while the Senate deals with this bill. So there's something for members of Congress to throw down on right now. And I would say on our issues, we should make sure that they're caring about impacts to Afghans and other humanitarian interests. And I'll throw it back over to you, Sean.
Thank you so much. We are going to keep going here. I want to just make it before I share the screen again. I just want to make a quick point about everything that you just heard from Meredith and Danilo and Daniel. There's a lot of real human impacts on all of this. A lot of cases of active duty U.S. military family members in the questions. You can see that there are family of our active duty service members who are trapped. There are children who are trapped. We're going to go over the numbers here in a minute. And Congress has passed plenty of laws that direct how we address these things, but the administration's ignoring it. So one thing that you can do is remind your member of Congress that they're a co-equal branch of government. Bring them a pocket constitution if you want to. Remind them that they're a co-equal branch of government and that they need to stand up. I'm going to go through by the numbers real quick. I'll share my screen again. And while I'm doing this, I want to remind folks there are government, advocates, Afghans, and press on this call. We are live streaming it. So everything that you hear here is public information. Feel free to shout it everywhere. You can go visit our YouTube and see the live stream, pull it down and share it with anybody you want. If you want a specific piece of it to be clipped, hit me up. Just let me know the timing and I'll pull it for you. All right. So by the numbers, these are the most accurate numbers that exist. They're from government reports until the government stopped doing reports. In Afghanistan, the Enduring Welcome Pipeline, the Enduring Welcome Pipeline is made up of only people who are eligible to be relocated here because of their relationship to the United States. They are either one of our employees and they're SIV eligible through the consular track, or they are a refugee track person. They're like, for example, a female tactical platoon commander who was gathering intelligence for us, partner forces who trained, fought, and bled alongside our service members, judges and prosecutors who put the Taliban away, and yes, even the family of our active duty U.S. military service members. So 212,000 of those folks in Afghanistan, about 55,000 outside of Afghanistan. Of that number, about 13,000 are family reunification cases, and I'm going to ask Anna Colby from World Relief to come on in a moment to talk about the family reunification cases. And then 3,000 individual family members of active duty U.S. military, with 200 trapped on the base in Qatar. The refugee pause has stopped their ability to move. They were moved from Afghanistan or somewhere to Qatar to complete processing. In the middle of that process, the Trump administration issued executive orders on January 20th, stopping all refugee flows. And now the only refugees that can move are a very small number, 160 covered by the Pacito versus Trump injunction, and white South African farmers. I asked a room full of Afghans if anybody was a white South African farmer the other day, and everybody was like, yeah. It is a clear injustice. In the SIV pipeline, so this number is encompassed by the numbers above, but this number is really important. Pre-chief of mission is the approval process that used to happen at the embassy. Now it happens at the Afghan SIV unit. There are 64,000 cases in some state of preparation. They are not complete. They may have sent one email that said, I want to apply for SIV, and that's it. 64,000 cases there. That number is really squishy. We don't know how many of those would actually end up completing, especially given the amount of work that has gone into it. But completed cases at the Afghan SIV unit is about 48,000. And what's important about that is that right now, the Afghan SIV unit is making 1,000 decisions a week with their staffing. They have a couple hundred staffers now working there. There is concern that they may be brought down to 11. So of the 1,000 cases that are being decided upon each week, about 30% of those are being approved. So if we take the 30% approval and apply it to that 48,000 number, you get about 15,000 that should get through chief of mission approval. And that's only principal applicants. Currently, there are 32,000 approved principal applicants, which means 32,000 plus 15,000 is 47,000, right? So we need about 47,000. We'll round up to 50,000 principal applicant SIVs, visas allocated by Congress in order for folks to get their visas and move here. There are less than 9,000 principal applicant visas remaining to serve those 47,000 people right now. So not only do we need Congress to save care and save the relocation function, we need them to do their job and allocate more visas. I know that there's a big ask out there for 20,000 right now. We think it's going to take about 50,000 more in addition to what is there now to meet the number. It could increase by a few thousand, but probably 50,000 would get the job done. All told, there are about 167,000 people who are in the SIV pipeline who could move so long as they got their interview. They're ready to move now. So shutting down care is not great for these people. Anna, can you come on and talk a little bit about the family reunification situation?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Colby, and I'm with World Relief, and I also co-chair for Evacuate Our Allies, the unaccompanied Afghan minors working group. Yeah, basically where we're at is that there has been little to no communication from CARE in the last few months since the contracted caseworkers were let go. I believe that was about 2 months ago, although everything feels a little blurry right now timeline-wise. But we went from having, regular check-ins, or at least I did and was able to communicate that to the working group, regular check-ins with people at CARE, the caseworker who was handling the majority of our cases across the United States, to little to no communication. And in this time of uncertainty, there has been little to no communication with the attorneys handling these unaccompanied Afghan minor cases and parents whose kids are overseas. So little to no communication with us as attorneys, also little to no communication with the Afghans themselves. And some of the communication that has happened with our Afghan clients has been very confusing, and we've heard different things that have had to be clarified. And so if if family members have been lucky enough to have their family member overseas be in a third country like Qatar or Pakistan, they've received a little bit of communication from the local embassy staff or contractors on the ground, and often that's been a little bit at odds with the either zero communication or little communication that we've had in the States. And so there's a lot of confusion going on. I'm sure many of you on this call have clients reaching out to you, wondering what's going on, wondering what's going to happen with their cases. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't really have answers for that. A lot of the unaccompanied Afghan minors who are in the country right now are their parents don't really have avenues outside of the refugee pathway because they're minors and minors aren't able to apply for I-730s for their parents. And so those cases that were the easiest to process in the last 3 years, we had a lot of UAMs who were here whose parents were brought over. Those cases have stopped, even if they were in process. And then even for cases where they have an alternative pathway where they would be eligible for care family reunification, in those cases, maybe parents who are here who've gotten asylum and able to file asylee follow to join I-730s for their kids or spouses. Even those cases, we have not seen much processing in the last few months. And so if you're on this call and you are on a senator's office or representative's office, I really urge you to reach out to the State Department, reach out to CARE, and tell them that these families who are going through extreme emotional turmoil and trauma need communication of some sort. Please, if you have communication with government offices and are able to communicate that, that's really what's needed right now. Obviously, the large majority of these cases are our allies who are evacuated. But also, like Sean mentioned before, we also have family reunification cases of U.S. military families. Or like I personally have a case of a U.S. military veteran. The soldier was in Afghanistan during the evacuation, working to get people out, and was not able to get out some of his family members. And so this covers a wide swath of people. And so we are really just looking for more communication right now. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Anna. All right, so we're going to get the Q&A here in a moment. I'm going to burn through that. Most of them are very quick answers. But first, what needs to happen? We need immediate White House action to restart enduring welcome and ensure that the relocations are ongoing. We need waivers for travel-ready Afghans to enter under enduring welcome on the refugee track. Clear guidance to NGOs, stakeholders, affected families. Even if the Trump administration is going to shut this all down, they should at least have the courage to let people know who are going to be impacted. And it would be great to have an extension of TPS and parole to protect Afghans who are already here so they can get what they need. Now, what can you do to help? Talk about it. Talk about this on your social media. Look at AfghanEvac.org. Look at our social media. There's a bunch of stuff there. There's a bunch of different organizations out there that are working on this. Your organizations, other organizations, people are talking about this. Amplify each other's things. There's no ego in this. Just amplify everybody. We need to make as much noise as possible. Write an op-ed. You can write an opinion editorial from your perspective. Place it in your local paper. Put it on LinkedIn. Put it on Medium. Get the word out there. The only way that this is going to change is if you're making noise and everybody's making noise about this. If you are an Afghan who is impacted by this, TPS or parole, or your status is not durable, I would not recommend making a lot of noise. You should get a lawyer. Anybody whose status is in question should get a lawyer. Don't take advice from a bunch of wily advocates. Get a lawyer if you're worried about your case. You can go to AfghanEvac.org/resources. You can look at AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. They are the gold standard. The only people that you should be taking advice from on your cases are qualified immigration attorneys. You can volunteer with NGOs, stakeholders, affected families. Raise your hand, say, what can I do to help? You can donate to organizations that are helping to protect Afghans who are already here. We would love donations. There's lots of different organizations out there who would take your money. We have this resources slide here. Take a picture of it if you'd like. All over our website, there's a ton of different resources. If you're an organization out there and you have a resource and you want us to amplify it, we will. Please let us know. We would be delighted to do that. And now we're going to jump into Q&A. All right, I'm just going to go through the Q&A slide here. Somebody asked, will the recording be shared? Yep, it's being shared right now on our YouTube. We're not going to take it down. We'll probably put it on TikTok and all of that. We want to make sure people have... Our philosophy is that we need to make sure everybody has as much information as possible from reliable sources. There's a question about a refugee case, a P1 refugee case. Having done the whole process, is there any chance that this case will be processed even if you can self-fund? As of right now, refugee cases, except for the 160 cases that were very specifically included in the Pasito case, there's not movement happening. And there won't be movement happening on that unless there's a successful court case that the administration complies with, or the administration changes their mind during the ongoing cycle of U.S. RAP program reporting. There's not a secret back door. There's not like, if you know somebody you can get in, that is not a thing. If somebody's telling you that's a thing, they're trying to take advantage of you. Will the recording be shared? We already answered that. Are there deportation threats, concerns for Afghan asylees who've been granted asylum but not yet applied for or received green cards? If you are a lawyer and you want to answer that question, send me a little note. But generally, if you've been granted asylum, you should be okay. I don't really want to answer that question because if you're worried about it, you should talk to a lawyer. Green card processing takes a long time. There was a pause in green card processing. Now we've started to see those being issued. It's not fast. It was like 8 months last I checked. So if you applied for a green card 2 months ago, no wonder you didn't get it yet. Let's see. If the visa ban targeting Afghan nationals takes effect, would it also impact green card holders traveling outside the U.S. on short work-related trips? I don't know. Potentially. Oh, it looks like Spojmi wants to say something. Let me scroll down here. All right, maybe I don't have it. Never mind. If I were a U.S. green card holder and I were an Afghan, I just simply wouldn't leave the country right now. Like, there's just no good reason until things settle to do that, in my opinion. Let's see. This may be rhetorical, but what exactly do I tell the former ANSOF members that I care for in Afghanistan, Pakistan about the U.S. government standing shoulder to shoulder with them and not forsaking them again? They're losing hope every day. Robert, what I would do is I would go to AfghanEvac.org/elected-officials. I'm going to put it in the chat. You can look up your elected official. There's a draft letter that you can personalize, and you can tell your member of Congress and your senators exactly what's happening. The only way that this is going to change is if the executive branch decides to change, or Congress remembers that they're a co-equal branch and does something about it. The courts can't fix all of these things, and if the executive branch is not is working actively to gum up the works, then it's just not going to get fixed. So everybody here, everybody who's on this call right now, if you haven't yet written your member of Congress, you're wrong. Go to the website, write your member of Congress, make your voice heard. If you care about this, you have to do that. If you're an Afghan and you're worried about whether or not your member of Congress is going to be helpful, you can reach out to us. We'll help you sort of track on that. We work with a lot of caseworkers that care deeply about this, and we're happy to share your stories. But again, if you're a refugee case, that's just sharing a story, right? There's no movement on that until Congress and the courts and the executive branch get their shit together. So, Robert, one thing that you can do for what do you tell them is you can go to afghanevac.org/resources. There's a case management guide that talks about trauma-informed communications. Be honest. Folks can handle bad news. What they can't handle is no news. Right? That's why AfghanEvac focuses on reducing uncertainty. What's going to happen to the people stuck in Qatar with CARE being eliminated? We don't know. They might have to become Qataris, right? And that's not what Qatar wants to hear. That's not what we want to hear. But the United States government brought them there. They have an obligation. They can't keep acting like babies. They have to handle their obligations. Our green card application is still being processed. We understand that they have begun processing again. In the absence of CARE, would the P1, P2 cases still be processed by State Department pursuant to Pacito versus Trump? Does somebody want to come on and give a broader overview of one of the folks that's already spoken of Pacito versus Trump and exactly what it is that makes people injunction protected versus not? If you do, just come on. Yeah, Meredith, come on in.
Yeah, I can start, and if Danilo wants to hop in, he is invited to. I can understand that it's been a bit of a whirlwind with Pacito v. Trump, as there has been a series of different interwoven court orders directing the resumption of refugee processing and admissions. The current state of play, because of the interplay between the district court and the Ninth Circuit, is that there is an agreed upon injunction protected 160 refugees who had already had a strong reliance interest on being resettled to the U.S. Now, when we're looking at what does it mean to have a strong reliance interest, generally speaking, we're talking about refugees who had been booked for travel already on or around January 20th. So folks who had already gone through the entire process, security and medical checks were valid, and were travel ready and booked on flights facilitated by IOM. So, but we don't want just 160 refugees being resettled this fiscal year. We believe that there were more than 10,000. There were approximately 12,000 people who had been booked for travel or had a strong reliance interest in our definition for being resettled in the United States as of January 20th, right? So we would argue that there are more than 10,000 people who could potentially be resettled under the current scheme that they're looking at. However, the judge has indicated that they are appointing a special neutral who can serve as an arbiter of, I'm going to go off camera just to save my bandwidth, a special neutral who can be appointed to serve as an arbiter to identify on a case-by-case basis who could be injunction protected on top of that 160. Now, who else is being resettled? We mentioned Afrikaner resettlement, but 59 people arrived earlier this month. Their news reports indicate there's about 100 people planned for resettlement in this first phase of Afrikaner resettlement. And then there's the SIV self-travelers. So we're continuing to push for the robust resumption of refugee admissions, even well beyond the thousands of people we think had a strong reliance interest comparable to the plaintiff. But at minimum, that is what we would argue. I hope that clarifies. Danilo, is there anything I missed?
I mean, only if you want to get even further into the weeds with this injunction protected class, which is that Meredith said it correctly. For people who had flights booked immediately after this ban went into place, that's the 160. Yeah. Then there's this bigger population, of course, of people who are in various stages of the process. And that, we get questions all the time. Will they or will they not fit into that injunction protected class? That's what this judge is going to determine. They're going to elect an arbiter to do this case by case review. And we've suggested as plaintiffs, Churchill Service is a plaintiff in this case, we've suggested categories that the arbiter should consider. And among those categories are minor children traveling without an accompanying adult, cases authorized for expedited processing for medical or protection concerns, cases of Afghan refugees who are on these third country platforms, who have been sort of required by the U.S. government to relocate to a third location for processing of their application. So cases that resettlement support centers overseas, RSCs, identify as having strong reliance interests. So we've kind of suggested some lists of criteria, but the judge has not determined yet what that additional criteria might be. And even then, it would require this case by case review. So we really can't provide anything concrete beyond that group of 160 who should have already received some contact from the administration. But as Meredith said, we're fighting in the courts. We're fighting in the courts of public opinion for more people to be resettled, whether through this Pasito injunction or otherwise. And so really focusing on the entire population of those who are left in the backlog.
And that court of public opinion is where we all can help. We know that the administration has contacted 56 people in Qatar. We don't know sort of whether or not they've contacted everyone else. They were supposed to, but they've been real choosy about how they're complying with court orders these days. Thank you, Danilo. Thank you, Meredith. Doug asked, does the elimination of care mean those Afghans with approved OSD and DOS confirmation numbers have all documents have all gone through the interview process will be eliminated or ignored? Not necessarily, and no. I know DoD still cares deeply about this. So do a lot of the folks at state. The problem is that nobody knows what they're going to do, right? We don't know if they're going to hit delete on all these cases. We don't think they're going to hit delete on all the cases. That would be egregious, I think. We don't. DoD has, we're getting back channels from people at DoD, people at State Department, people everywhere, flagging things for us, right? This is why we were able to break today the news of the congressional notification as soon as it went. Because the folks that we've been working alongside for the past 3.5 years, they all care deeply about this. They want to see this keep moving. This is very specifically a political appointee, Trump administration. They don't want this to happen. Stephen Miller doesn't want this to happen. And we think that President Trump doesn't know that Stephen Miller is squandering his relationship with veterans, whatever relationship he has there. So the big news here is that we don't know. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how punitive they're going to be. We're really grateful for folks like Danilo and Meredith and the folks at IRAP and Anna and the people who are fighting this in the courts, because that is, it's the second best path, right? The best, I guess the third best path. The best path would be the administration kept the safest, most secure legal immigration pathway built with civil society and veterans and a willing partner at the table in the last administration. The second best would be Congress woke up from their stupor and realized that they've spoken about this, they've talked about this, they've made cases, they've made laws about this. And I guess third is the courts could move a little faster. I know that doesn't answer your question, Doug. We don't know, but I would suspect that big lists of cases are kept safe for a new administration that may come in one day. Is there any advocacy litigation being done for post-approval COM revocation withdrawals for people who have their green cards and their derivatives? Look, the best thing that those folks can do is call a lawyer. Call a lawyer. The number one thing is call a lawyer. That lawyer is going to tell you need to apply for asylum, I think. If you are not in a durable status and you haven't yet applied for asylum, call a lawyer. Make sure you're protected by having applied for asylum. If you've simply applied for SIV and you only have TPS or parole, you are not protected. Call a lawyer. Right, Lance? Call a lawyer. We want everybody to call a lawyer. Any questions about P1 or P2? The answer is no, nothing can happen unless you're protected by the Pacito case or they restart refugees. What can we do to find out the status of cases? Well, as of right now, you can go to afghanevac.org/case-inquiry. I don't know how long that's going to keep working since they're shutting down care, but you can try that for now, and somebody will respond to you with a case. It'll come from us, but you'll get a updated case status. Let's see. If you are somebody who has COM approval or somebody who has some sort of consular case, not a refugee case, not US RAP, and you can get to a third country for your interview, do that. You should not expect any help from the US government anymore. So do what you can to get to a place that can do an interview if you're at the interview stage. All right. All right. I think we've mostly answered all the questions. There's a lot of questions in the chat about should people be hopeful. If I were a refugee, I would not be hopeful that this was going to get resolved quickly. I would not wait around. If it were me, I would be trying to find a job, trying to figure out how to move on with my life until I can get to a different, safer pathway. But I wouldn't expect help from the US government. That's my honest assessment. I wish that there was a different answer. But that seems to be the reality of where we're at now. All right, folks. I got a question about drone survivors. I would say anybody who was coming through the refugee pathway, I don't know if they were coming through the refugee pathway or not. If you're coming through the refugee pathway, there's not a lot happening for those folks. For the consular pathway, the truth is that the current White House doesn't understand this. They had a big meeting recently where they just sort of didn't really understand any of the things that were going on. And so it's just going to take all of us making our voices heard, continuing to bear witness on this. We know that it can work because it was working. There were 5,000 Afghans a month coming here, and family reunifications were moving, however slowly. Look, we just don't have good answers, and look, it's important. It's important that you all know that. It's important that you all know that there are Afghans out there that are looking to all of us for good answers. And it's so important that we not provide false hope, that we're just very clear about what reality looks like. If you are not getting our regular emails on Mondays, you can sign up at afghanevac.org/engage. I'm going to put it into the chat right now. We're going to close this out. Yeah, folks, I know that there's no good news right now. Stay in touch, and we will make sure that you know as soon as we know anything that's going on. Thank you, and have a great day.